Onward to a discussion of mitosis and cancer. When we think about mitosis and what is going on in mitosis, we can relate that to cancer when we think about what can possibly go wrong in mitosis and how that connects to what cancer is. But let me touch on some highlights here. What are the highlights of mitosis? What's the point? Why do cells go through mitosis? What causes cancer? And why can cancer be thought of as a disease of mitosis? Just again, we will do this, a very brief version of this here. We won't discuss in detail the phases of mitosis. You're no doubt familiar with prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. You've seen those before. Those are stages of mitosis, stages that are going to be characterizing what happens to chromosomes as they are moved around in cell division. Mitosis has to happen so that we can produce new cells as cells die, and so that cells can be added as we grow. And what you're seeing here is just a really simple schematic version of mitosis. DNA is copied. Here we have two chromosomes, a red one and a blue one. They're copied so that we have two red copies and two blue copies. During mitosis, these copies are split. So each of these two cells, these two daughter cells that emerge, each has a copy of a red and a blue chromosome. So notice these cells are just the same. These cells are just the same as this one in terms of the genetic material. That really is the point of mitosis, is that new cells are going to have the exact same DNA. And why is that so important? See the previous video. We know that DNA is the instruction, the blueprint, the recipe for making all of our traits. So we have to have all of our future cells have to have the same information in them as these initial cells. So mitosis is the primary kind of cell division we're talking about here, the production of new cells. Meiosis is a little bit different. We'll be talking about this more in A&P2. Meiosis is really about the production of sex cells, sperm cells, and egg cells, oocytes technically. We'll be talking about those more in A&P2. The difference there is the result. There's going to be some different parts of that process that result in differences in the cells themselves. Let's not focus our attention too much on meiosis right now. Let's sort of stick with mitosis, and we'll deal with those other details later. So then if we're considering that mitosis is cell division and we're moving around chromosomes, we can have, unfortunately, situations where the cell division is not regulated anymore. Cancer can be thought of as a disease of mitosis because DNA that controls or regulates the rate at which the cells divide is disrupted, and we'll look at what can cause that in a second. What I want you to notice here is our normal healthy cell is going to make two healthy cells that are exactly genetically alike. Here we make a good cell, a good cell, a good cell, and whoops, a not so good cell, an injured cell. Perhaps the DNA has been damaged by some environmental agent. Perhaps the cell division process was not going well. And this cell, if all goes well, will actually be destroyed. That seems kind of an odd outcome, which you can see here, not too well. Let me show you a little better. This process is called apoptosis. This is orchestrated cell suicide. This cell was not functional, was not correct, and there are mechanisms in the body to detect that, kill that cell. If we can, we'll fix it. If not, we'll kill it. Normal cell division works that way. In cancer cell division, we have our healthy cell goes through a cell division, and we end up with a bad cell here. This cell is not right. However, apoptosis malfunctions. A genetic mistake or an error in the DNA that would normally help us stop that cell from dividing doesn't function. It's like cutting off the brakes of a runaway train. So now I get more cells that are going to be messed up and more cells that are going to be messed up. What they're trying to show you here is that eventually these cells sort of overwhelm the healthy cells and we have this uncontrolled cell growth. So recognize that what cancer ultimately is a disease of cell division. It's unregulated cell division that ultimately results in tumors. Just to introduce you to terms that you've probably actually heard before, benign and malignant. When we look at uncontrolled cell growth, we can look at it in a couple of different forms. Benign cell growth is when you have slow-growing encapsulated cells that are quote-unquote out of control. We're trying to show you here that this is a capsule here, this big white area, and the cells that are growing improperly are in this capsule, and therefore they're not spreading. They're sort of walled off, and they're not going anywhere. The term we use for this is metastasis. These cells are not metastasizing, they're not spreading around the body, and they are not necessarily going to be safe, but safer than malignant growths. Benign growths can be fatal if they press on blood vessels or damage other tissues, but in general, these are slow-growing diseases that can actually be dealt with usually fairly easily. Malignant cancer here is a fast-growing, really out of control situation where the cells are not encapsulated. They're spreading. Again, it's kind of hard to see the capsule here, but they're trying to show you this is the capsule. But these cells are going to be leaving. They're going to be getting away from where they are. They're going to be metastasizing and spreading around the body, and therefore they can then start cancer cells growing in other places. Cells that spread from a breast tumor may end up in the bone or in the brain or in the lung. So when we talk about metastasis, we're talking about this process of spreading from one location to another, and that makes malignant cancers particularly fatal. So what causes cancer? This can be somewhat a hot button topic depending on who you talk to. Cancer has multiple causes ultimately. Cancer is going to be caused in many cases by carcinogens. Carcinogen means cancer-causing agent. Things that we associate with chemicals in tobacco smoke or radiation, perhaps chemicals and pesticides, infectious agents can serve as carcinogens. These are going to be things that can change the DNA and now change those regions, those genes that control cell division. So now the cells are not growing under control and they're growing out of control. You can also have cancer that's related to abnormalities in the genetic material itself. For example, you are probably familiar, you've probably heard of this gene called BRCA1. This is actually a gene that we associate with some forms of breast cancer. This can be passed from a mom to her daughter, and therefore increase her risk of her developing breast cancer when she's an adult. You also can have issues related to the process that we mentioned before, where just errors in DNA replication, as cells are dividing and copying DNA and splitting it up, they may actually mess up. Now, again, if we catch it, no harm, no foul. But if those cells go on and become abnormal cells and continue to change and can grow out of control, you can end up with more cells and ultimately tumors. An idea that came out just recently that's quite controversial. Some scientists are suggesting that some cancer is due to quote unquote bad luck. Tissues that reproduce really quickly are going to have lots and lots and lots of cell divisions, and they said it's just a matter of probability that you're going to have more chances for more errors. So they attribute some cancers to just the probability of having these errors. Some scientists really are upset with these guys because they don't want to imply, well, we don't want the implication to be you can't control your cancer risk, because there's probably some cancer risks you can control, like not smoking and avoiding radiation, but there are probably some forms of cancer that are going to be just inherent to the way our cells divide. I mentioned synergism here because let's say that somebody does worship the sun, they have a lot of radiation exposure and certain chemical exposure and certain genetic risks. Synergism means to amplify the effect. So tobacco and radiation by themselves may be, for example, a certain percent risk of cancer, but if you have them both together, that's going to even further increase the risk. And finally, I mentioned unknown because I don't want to imply that we understand all the mechanisms of cancer, because we don't. Back to breast cancer for a second, we can explain about 15 to 20% of breast cancers from genetic mechanisms that we understand. Do the math. That means there's another 80% that we really don't quite understand yet, and that is another source of scientific investigation. I'm going to show these videos, and hopefully they'll work for us here, and if not, I'll put the links up as well. But these videos are actually very good summaries of cancer and metastasis.
When I grow up, I'm going to get married in the most beautiful dress ever. I'm going to have a big white dress with flowers and some...
And of course, we have a commercial first.
That's the one.
Sorry.
That's my dream dress.
Find your dream dress at the Have It All sale with up to $200 off. Cancer is a group of over 100 diseases characterized by abnormal, uncontrolled cell growth. In a healthy body, cells grow, die, and are replaced in a very controlled way. Damage or change in the genetic material of cells by environmental or internal factors sometimes results in cells that do not die and continue to multiply until a mass of cancer cells or a tumor develops. Most cancer-related deaths are due to metastasis, malignant cells that penetrate into the circulatory system and establish colonies in other parts of the body. Great advancements have been made, but cancer is still the leading cause of death for people under the age of 85. In the United States, 1 in every 4 people die from cancer.
Spread of tumors to distant locations is of great importance in cancer. About 90% of the deaths due to cancer involve tumors that have spread around the body. The movement
out of every
tumor
2
cells
men
to other
and
parts
1
of
out
the
of
body
every
is
3
known as
women.
metastasis. Metastasis is a complex process during which cancer cells break off of the original or primary tumor and move through the body to form tumors at new locations. From the point of view of a cancer cell, this is a dangerous and often unsuccessful process. A trip through the body is full of hazards that cause the death of most cells that begin the journey, even tough cancer cells. To begin the process, individual cells must break away from the tumor and invade nearby vessels. The cells crawl along the surface of other cells and the fibrous, stringy structure surrounding them, and then force their way in. Shown here is the invasion of the blood supply. Once inside a blood vessel, the cancer cells may perish from a variety of causes. Some cells die simply because they are unable to survive floating around in the bloodstream. Others may become damaged and die when they squeeze through tight spaces or bump into the walls of the blood vessels. Still, other migrating cells may be recognized and destroyed by cells of the immune system. How and where the migrating cells stop is different for different cancer types. Once the tumor cells are no longer moving, they can begin the process of forming a new tumor by leaving the blood vessel and beginning to reproduce in the new location. This does not always occur, and cells that have made it this far may still die or fail to divide. If the new environment is suitable, the newly arrived cell will begin to grow and a new tumor will develop.
Okay, that's our look at cancer and metastasis. You now have an assignment based upon those 2 videos, the 3.1 and 3.2. Thank you very much.